Fred.
Hi, friend. I'm Pastor Brett Wilson.
I'm Pastor CJ Valenti.
And we are here to share with you this week's tea conversations and questions. We even have our tea.
We got our tea, we lit a candle, we're ready.
And I've been sharing these each week with different congregation members and with our congregation, but today it worked out for us to share the conversation.
And we at Faith Lutheran are also using the tea questions, so it's great to be able to connect in this way.
Yeah. And the idea behind them, it says, invite your beloveds to sit with you.
Aww.
And you're one of my beloveds.
You're one of my beloveds too.
And so I thought this week is a little different, but it's a way of modeling having this conversation with someone you love and with people that you feel safe with. And so we hope that inspires you to do so as well, or maybe makes you think about these questions.
You don't have to have a theological degree.
No, and we have not prepared for this at all.
We haven't looked at them.
No, we haven't looked at the question. I've thought of it, or I've talked about them a little, but we really haven't prepped at all. So we're just going to have a conversation, and because we believe that heartfelt and spiritual conversations and questions are a way that, God works and shows God's love. So,
yeah. What's the first one?
The first one is, if you could change one thing in the world, what would you change?
Just one thing?
I mean, that's what it says, but we can break rules.
Well, in our confirmation class recently, we've been talking about the Israelites in the wilderness. And one of the rules of the wilderness right before they got to the promised land was, the whole, idea that everyone has what they need. And when they, get to the promised land, they divide the land, and bigger clans get bigger pieces, and smaller clans get smaller pieces, but everyone's got a little piece. And one of the questions was, wouldn't that be awesome if we could live like that now? What if everyone had a place to rest their head, no matter? And that was just, the starting place. And I think about how revolutionary that would be if everyone had a safe place to rest their head at the end of the day. And especially thinking for my own context in Arlington, where the cost of housing is just so high, right?
Yeah. And Georgetown Lutheran, we have the drop-in center for folks experiencing homelessness. So it's hard not to hear this question and think about something big and systemic like that. Or also what comes to mind for me is climate change, or just our use of resources and hunger. What if everyone shared?
Right.
It seems like preschool kind of stuff, but it's
rules, but we're still trying to figure it out.
We're still,
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the other thing that God tries to instill during the wilderness is just take what you need for today, right? Right. And that'll be okay. Yeah, the manna.
Maybe God reinstituting manna wouldn't be a bad thing, but I don't know.
You want to eat bug poop?
What, when it turns bad, you mean?
No, well, isn't there a line somewhere? Scholars believe that it's what is this, right?
Yeah, what is it?
Some people think it's grasshopper droppings.
Really?
The foam left on plants.
Okay.
Yeah, because we were talking about that at Bible study because we get snakes this week, and they're I would be if you were eating bugs in the desert for 40 years, I would be upset too, right?
I've never heard that. I always think of it as wafery bread.
I mean, that's
yeah.
But we don't know.
We don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But even that, they were okay with God's provision. I love your wind chimes.
Yeah,
type thing.
It's great and also slightly annoying. But
it's kind of nice.
Yeah. Holy Spirit's with us through our air conditioning vent.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
anyway, one thing. Well, these things seem really basic, right? And yet we just can't wrap our heads around it.
So that first question is a really big one, and I think a lot of times we talk about what we would change from a kind of either a dreaming kind of place or a soapbox kind of place, right? But I find it interesting how the second question is like, oh man, I have to change too. So, or like, it makes me think about the link between these. The second question is, what's the biggest way you've changed over the years?
Oh. Well, that's funny, like, to think about, because we've known each other.
We've known each other
for
how
a
long
while.
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 16 years maybe?
Yeah. There's more gray hairs.
Yeah, we've changed.
Yeah, we've changed.
Yeah. We were roommates in seminary, so we met each other the first week.
Yeah.
And,
I feel like I've become more jaded.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, or maybe more realistic. Like, thinking about these big systems of change. I think there was a point, maybe even in seminary, where I felt like I can make, like, by me recycling, I'm going to make a really big difference, right? And now I see it more of in systems, right? It's entrenched in these, like, systems and corporate decisions that I really don't have much control over, right? I will say I still recycle.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, and compost and do all those things.
I still think on the spectrum.
On the spectrum?
Of people, you're not that jaded.
Yeah.
But life's hard, isn't it?
Life's hard.
Like,
Yeah, it may be more realistic, I think. Yeah. Like, I hear these big things happening, and they don't surprise me as much. Yeah. How do you think you've changed?
It's funny because I would have never guessed you would have said that you got more jaded.
Yeah?
Even though, like, now that you say that, I see what you mean. Just because I think, realism or, like, life's hard stuff. I actually think my, like, immediate reaction to this question is that and maybe you can tell me the truth about whether you see it in me. I think in some ways I've gotten softer.
Yeah.
And I think particularly, like, divorce and my work through therapy and the ways in which life has called me to be a little more vulnerable, or, like, I don't know. I'm pretty cynical about a lot of things, but I think I want to be softer, and life has made me softer, I think, so.
I see that in you. I remember in seminary you would keep attendance of people, like, and like, really judge them for being late and things like that.
Well,
and,
I've been a Latin teacher, and I like things like
you like things in order, and why wouldn't you do things with perfection, right?
Well, I never even think of myself as a perfectionist, but I think I want.
You hold yourself to high standards.
Oh, I don't know about that. But I think, like, well, even for you, like, you come at it, I think, from the more, I see in you coming at it from the more, like, dreamer perspective, right?
Wow. Really?
What? You don't?
Really? Oh.
Huh. That, like, not in a perfectionist, but in that you really want things to be better.
I want things to
so
be better.
deeply, and I think it's part of, like, it's a hard part of loving people in the world, right? It's like,
and maybe that's my work in therapy with the realism thing of, like, I want things to be better, and yet I've learned, how do I say it? Like, the lower expectations of others has helped me meet people where they are, right? And that's been a healthy thing, I think.
That's right. Here's my plug for the book we're reading for the book of the year, which is Low Anthropology, which is about that, which I think we're both, like, driving at in different ways, and This last one is hard.
Okay. Take a breath here.
The disciples remembered and believed in Jesus' teaching all the more after his death and resurrection. Have you ever lost someone you loved? If so, what's one thing you remember telling you before they died? I guess it is an interesting way of looking at this. Like, how does someone's death or not being around anymore put into perspective, like, who they were for you? trouble thinking of an answer for this one.
I think of a lot of parishioners.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Which I don't know if people would be surprised at that or not, but we come close to death and dying,
right?
And love people and miss them, you know.
Yeah. I think of two people in particular. My second call was a rural parish, and this person was on the call committee, and he was a salesman by trade. He was in his 80s, and he looked at me during the interview, the second call interview, and he's like, "Are you going to love our people?" Like, and it was a genuine question, and I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that. I can love. Let's love our people together." Yeah. And his body deteriorated in the time that I was his pastor, and he was one of the only people I've ever interacted with in a pastoral relationship who always offered to pray for me at the end of visits, which I just found really humbling. I think sometimes as pastors we walk into a room and people expect us to be the theological authority, and sometimes I forget that people also have this beautiful faith and heart, right? And so being prayed over, I just remember his was one of the last funerals I did, and then like 2 weeks later I announced I was leaving, and so it was really hard for me. I had a lot of grief around that because like I committed to loving those people, and Norris was just a very tender person, part of that, and we didn't always agree on things. The other person that I think of was someone who had breast cancer and who was younger, and one of the last conversations I had with her, she talked about how she was okay that she was in hospice and dying because she just wasn't sure that she could live through another election.
Whoa.
And this was like right before, this would have been like 2020. It was right before the pandemic launched.
Wow.
And I think about her often because the election, I think she would have been okay with the way the election turned out, and yet like our world changed so dramatically, and I just wonder what she would have thought about how life changed. Like she was she was an artist and a weaver, and just had a really interesting perspective. And so maybe that's that realism thing of like, if you were able to see like how we rose to the occasion in a way, right? Or like how we didn't give up in that moment.
Those are really beautiful and tough examples.
Yeah,
it's a lot of parishioners that are coming to mind for me, and I didn't prep an answer to this one. I thought about too how like everybody has a different set of experiences around who they've lost or that kind of stuff, and my grandmother's died both when I was like a teenager or in college or pretty young, and so I have more of a longing of what the conversations I could have had with them as an adult now, and wonder about that. I actually, what's coming up for me as I think about this is some parishioners that I found really hard to love, and things that I remembered them telling me. Which is just this, like, for me, it's not being, like, it's just a beautiful example of, like, the sinner saint thing, and, it's such a privilege, and in my first call, I did so much death and dying and funeral work. I'm really inspired by some of those people's faith, and in particular, I remember people feeling really, this might sound morbid to people, but feeling really a sense of peace or comfort when they come to the end, and others who had lost their ability to speak, but they could still sing, and so we would sing hymns at the bedside, and find a lot of comfort in that. And yeah, and I remember being like honored with the trust of people to, you know, we had a member of my current congregation who died during the pandemic, who was a big part of some people's lives, and we had started planning her funeral, but we didn't get the chance to fill in all the details before she died. But she said to me, like, I trust you, whatever you do, and God will show up. And God did. So, yeah.
That's the other thing, this person who had breast cancer who died, she died in March of 2020, and we didn't do a funeral. It was one of the last weeks Zion was open. Wow. We did her service, so it would have been like 2022. Wow. It's just wild. The other thing this question brings up for me is maybe this is just where I am this week. Jon Stewart's dog died, and we talked about that. And so, like, I was in a conversation yesterday where everyone was sharing memories of their favorite pet who had died, and they're like, he spoke to me. He was able to name like how important animals are in our lives, and the role in that. And we almost had a chicken die in our house.
I know.
So, like,
nursed it back to health.
A resurrection story. Parsonage.
Easter sermon, but
yeah.
I mean, I guess this question also makes you think about, like, not taking for granted, or, you know, honoring those things while they're with us. So, and how, like, for the disciples, that was all put in perspective after.
Right, all of Jesus' stories sounded different through that lens, right?
Yeah, and really, like, depending on how you think about the Bible, I feel like all of it then has to be viewed from the point of view of friends who had lost their dear friend and mentor. So yeah. And it's hard for us as Christians to put ourselves in that place, right? Because we can't hear these stories without thinking about resurrection. Exactly, but for them, they also had loss. So.
Yeah, right.
We do too.
Yeah.
So maybe we should put a bow on it there.
Yeah.
We could talk for
a long time, but yeah.
Well, thanks for listening, and we'll share this with both of our congregations, and just pray that it inspires you maybe to think about these things yourself, or to ask someone else some of these questions and gather some of your beloveds as well. So.
There's no right or wrong answer here.
That's right. Never is, and God is with us. So.
God is with us.
Thanks, CJ.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yep.